we have two children, Mason and Olivia. They are twins and they are 5 years old. A few years ago, we were living in our old house, but we had to move because of a scary thing that happened. It's a long and scary story. I lived in my old house for 4 years. My wife Jennifer and I got married and had our children there. The neighborhood was slowly changing and not in a positive way. Nevertheless, we had originally planned to stay in that house for the future until the following events took place. Our house was at the very end of the neighborhood, and the house at the intersection of the road behind us was covered with tall trees and bushes. So we hardly ever saw those neighbors, but the neighbor to our left, let's call him Alexander to protect his identity. During the 4 years we lived in the same neighborhood, I spoke to Alexander only a few times, the first time as an introduction. The second time I spoke to him, I couldn't quite understand what he was saying because of his heavy accent, and he didn't seem to be a friendly person in general. 2 windows overlooked our back garden and there wasn't much privacy, but I never saw a light on in either of them, so I always thought of it as an unused guest room. Alexander lived alone. He was a little older than middle age with a strange behavior. One summer evening, my wife Jennifer was cooking dinner and I was helping her. It was dark but very hot outside. Our children were in the backyard with their toy cars, spending time in a light puddle of sand. After dinner was ready, I went to the window to call the children to eat. At that moment, I noticed Alexander watching the children from behind the fence. He had a sullen expression on his face. I quickly left the house and went to the backyard to call the children to eat. Alexander was still staring at us, so I asked him, "Do you need something?" He didn't answer, but he started to cut his grass, which was strange at that time of the evening. It was strange because he hadn't done anything during the day, and he was mowing the lawn in the evening, which raised questions in my mind. After we had eaten, we put the kids to bed, and we went to our bedroom to sleep. At 2 a.m., I was awakened by noises coming from our backyard, and when I went to check the yard, I couldn't see anyone, but I found a key belonging to Alexander on the ground, and his name was written on an iron key ring next to the key. This confirmed that the voices I had heard while I was asleep could be Alexander's. After a short break, Alexander was mowing his lawn again at 2 in the morning. "Hey mate, what are you doing up at 2 a.m.? He replied, "I'm looking for my lost keys. I can't see anything because the grass is so thick." I handed him back the keys I found and asked him how they ended up in my backyard. Alexander went back to his house and locked the door. I went back to my bedroom and thought about it all night. There were no keys around when the children were playing outside. They would have found them or I would have seen them. I woke up and the noise confirmed that Alexander had come to our back garden at night. I thought about calling the police, but I had no evidence. The next day, I was still thinking about what had happened the night before. I had many questions about what Alexander was doing in our garden. I was also thinking about how dangerous this could be for our children. At the breakfast table in the morning, I shared the situation with Jennifer. At first, she looked at me strangely, but then she said with a worried expression, "Maybe he just really lost his keys." However, I still harbored a doubt. That day, before our children's playtime, we decided to go outside. We checked all the areas in the garden and found nothing. However, at that moment, I noticed Alexander looking at us from his window. I decided to go over and talk to him. "Hello, Alexander. What were you doing in our garden last night?" He just grinned and said, "I was looking for my keys, I told you." "Why did mowing the lawn in the middle of the night make you look for your keys?" I asked. At that moment, Alexander's expression changed. He stared at me for a moment, then quickly closed his window. This made me even more anxious. The next incident happened 2 or 3 days later. This time, while I was asleep in the middle of the night, Jennifer woke me up by shaking me in a panic. At first, I looked around the room. I started to look round, and when I quietly crossed to the kitchen, I saw a figure across the street, a screwdriver in his hand. I immediately switched on the lights. Alexander was walking around with a screwdriver in his hand in the middle of the night. I told my wife to call 911 immediately. He tried to attack me several times with the screwdriver. I hit his arm with the chair in the kitchen and made him drop it. Soon I heard the police sirens. They took Alexander and sent him to jail. Or so I thought. 2 days later, I learned that Alexander was released without charge. We left the town to avoid a repeat of the incident. I had been living alone in a big city for a long time. I was very bored with the traffic and crowds of the city, so I decided to buy myself a small but luxurious house in a quiet and remote place. While I was moving my belongings to my new home, new neighbors came to me at short intervals to meet me. One of the neighbors was called Graham. Graham even helped me move my stuff. After I had packed my things, Graham invited me to have something to eat and drink with them. I was tired when I was sorting out my things, and although I didn't want to go, I felt obliged to accept his offer in case it would be a shame. Graham seemed to be a very hospitable person. When I entered his house, there were writings, drawn pictures, unintelligible things written all over the walls. I started to shudder. There were even nail marks on the wall. There were even traces of blood. When I asked him why the walls were like that, he replied, "I used to be a great artist. When we start talking, he talks nonsense. When I ask questions, sometimes he stops talking and sometimes he starts talking about different things. When he asked me where I came from, I told him that I came from San Antonio, Texas. Graham, as if he was not satisfied with my answer, said, 'Are you coming from far away to disturb our comfort?' and started to insult me. Without saying anything to the man, I left his house thinking that he was mentally unstable. I went to my new home, bought a few snacks, and started watching Netflix. I fell asleep before I saw the end of the film. I woke up around 12 a.m. to the sound of light wind coming from outside. I realized I hadn't locked the doors. Before I locked the door, I realized I had forgotten something in the car, so I walked to my car to get it. Graham was outside talking to himself, mumbling to himself, "Park here, park there, give it a little left." When he spotted me, he shouted, "Hey mate, come and help this guy park." There was nobody around but the two of us. There was no car. The guy was talking to himself. Without answering him, I picked up my forgotten item and went back to my house, locked all the doors, switched off the lights, and went back to sleep. The next morning, I left home early to take a walk and explore the neighborhood. I saw Graham waving to me from across the street. I turned my face to the ground and started running. After a light jog, I returned home again. It was already evening when I was cooking. When I turned on the TV to listen to the news, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. When I turned my face, Graham was watching me through the window. Graham was getting worse and worse. He was bothering me. I went outside. "What's up? What do you want?" "You're starting to bother me," I shouted. "I was just wondering what my mate was doing," he replied cheekily. I angrily shut the door in his face, pulled down all the curtains, and locked the door. After I got out, I made my bed and went to sleep. At 3 a.m., I heard the door being forced, and it sounded like someone was trying to pry it open with a crowbar. I immediately called 911 quietly and called for help. I heard the sound of the door opening, and I ran to the bathroom and locked myself in. I waited quietly for the police to arrive. I heard the person approaching the bathroom with slow steps. He shouted, "I know you're there." He started banging on the bathroom door with a crowbar. My heart started beating like it was going to burst out of my chest. Just in time, I heard the police sirens approaching, and I felt a little relieved. After waiting for 5 minutes, I came out of the bathroom thinking that he must have left. Outside, I saw that the police had caught that person. When I approached, I saw that it was Graham. I felt very happy that he couldn't hurt me. According to what I learned from the police, Graham escaped from a mental hospital a week ago. According to the policemen, they said that they had encountered cases where mentally ill people sometimes killed people, and that it was highly likely that I might be one of those people. After that day, I decided to go back to my crowded city.